Yeah, last week we were talking about the billionaire code and Alex Charfin's work, and we spent some time on the different levels. And I want to use that to kind of kick off the quick conversation. So this was the point here, and what he talks about, he uses dollar amounts, and you know what I want to do? I'm going to increase this. Let's see if we can. This slide. Yeah, so now we have a better view to share the screen. So now you can see it a little bit better if I blow it a little bit more. So the idea here is that these different levels, he does it by dollar amount. And one of the things that he's done is show many entrepreneurs are at each level. And what that showed up was a bottleneck that happens right in this area from about a million, from the million to about range right in here is the bottleneck, because it's very difficult to go from here to make enough money and have the wherewithal, have the customer base, and have the systems in place to be able to navigate through this next path. What's interesting is as you get over here, the revenue per employee can, over in this right side, the revenue per employee can as much as double, which gives the owner a lot to be able to hire people and uh, do some skunk works, test some things, absorb some losses. Over here, obviously, it's tight, but it's very difficult to get from here to there because this you need systems and you need people. And unless the person has had some training, like I said, it's going to be more difficult. So that's the backdrop I wanted to use. And I focus on this group here. And but what I do it counts. So I would say that going from about 10 to 15 people up to 100 is where my sweet spot is, because these are the folks who can benefit the support, the development, leadership, the building of layers, that layer, because that first layer of leadership, you may start with the general manager, but then you're going to add, and then there might be an office manager, then you may have somebody coming in to do some marketing work. So this is very fluid in here, but you get through it. You've got to work through it and have a leadership, because there's going to be turnover. And once you have your 4 to 6 people on that leadership team, when there's turnover, somebody leaves, you have other people who can absorb the work for a while. And you also have enough things going on that you can pull some stuff back while you're waiting. So that's the idea. Right. What I'm going to do from there is take a look at an infographic I saw the other day. This is from Cynthia Chan, and on LinkedIn, you can find her on LinkedIn. She does a lot of these infographics, and she does a nice job of talking about how stress shows up in the workplace for leaders. And it's right in line with what I'm talking about in my live events this week and the next week, which is stability under pressure for leaders. And how fatigue influences workplace decisions is the title. And you default to safe choices instead of smart ones. Small problems feel bigger than they are. And this aligned with the idea that willpower wanes throughout the day, discipline wanes throughout the day. The more we use willpower, the more it wanes. And it's not endless. It has constraints. The other thing that happens with willpower is you run into the resistance power. I don't want power and willpower. So especially the I don't want power is in the cortex. So they know that by what parts of the brain light up. And the prefrontal cortex was formed from 19 to 27. The 20 billion neurons in the prefrontal is developing and forming. This is where your executive functions come in. And I like to say it's where we operationalized our model of the world based on all the conditioning that we had. That I don't want power gets triggered because you have the willpower. So if you speak in public, but you had some I don't want power locked up from third grade when you had a speech to give and it was a disaster, and you said I'll never speak again. Emotion, it's an association, and it's keeping you alive in the way the subconscious works, right? It's keeping you safe. I'll never speak again, and you may not even have said those words again. But when you decide to go take public speaking or you decide to do some live work online, that I don't want power comes up. And I'm not aware of what's happening. All you feel is this resistance, and you can't on it, but you know that you take two steps forward and one or two steps back and you make progress because you have the I don't want power is just as strong. It's going to be the energy of the will. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because it's another reason why willpower wanes, because you're fighting against yourself. If you can get rid of all your I don't wants, the powers that hurt you, or don't want power for all the areas that are causing you resistance, unwanted or unneeded or unuseful resistance, you'll be able to do more. This is why it's important in the conversation about fatigue, because willpower wanes with fatigue as well. You say yes just to avoid extra. How many times have we seen that where a person just wants the conversation to go away? They kick the can down the curve, down the road, but it's not going away. It's coming back. Emotional rational judgment. You focus on urgent tasks and ignore the strategic ones. This also comes around in a loop, around and around and around. You're not making any progress, but we're worn out. Mentally, we're worn out, and all we can do is just keep putting what's in front of us. And if you don't you just keep trying harder. What's needed is a break. You just need to get, and you'll learn to. The more you pay attention to it, the more you learn to do some of these preemptive, like taking a break, going outside, going getting some fresh air, looking at some different things, breaking some of the patterns that have fallen into place. Patience drops and collapse suffers, and your brain chooses comfort over growth. This is, if anybody who does a lot of work late at night, you probably there. As there's a point where you shut down, and those days that you've been hyper busy, you shut down maybe faster. So it's just being aware, and instead of fighting against it, doing things because, and also recognizing it may not be fatigue the same way that you're fatigued at a long workout or after a long bout of something where you literally are tired and need rest. This fatigue mental, and be aware of it is all I'm saying. So something to keep in mind. So we preempt it. If you don't do it, you're going to suffer. If we're trying to be high performing, then you don't need to have those resistance factors going on. And then the other one, this is also from Cynthia Chan. Again, you can find her on LinkedIn, and you look at her posts on LinkedIn and you'll see more. You'll follow her and to get more. What stress reveals about how people lead. When pressure rises, pattern surface. And again, I'm enforcing that we have to do some performance hygiene, do some things to keep us in the right coherence, right? Because if you don't have coherence, you have chaos and rigidity. And we talk about presence. So that 7-step reset. Step two is we're making sure that we're that we have coherence and that we're present. This is that stability, even under pressure, even in chaos. We have that stability is not because we've suppressed the surges or the stimuli. It's because we're rapidly recovering. We're not letting things take and run because most things that come up that we're responding to, remember, tens of thousands of stimulus response. Most of those that are coming up do not need the urgent attention the way it would if it was an actual tiger. Urgency thing is is artificial. And that's why I like the Eisenhower matrix by looking at what's important and urgent versus what's important but not urgent and doing the important but not urgent and more and more and more. And by doing important, not urgent, you start to eliminate the urgent. And you also reframe. I tell if the phone rings, is that urgent or important? Well, we don't know until we look at who's calling. With caller ID now, you can tell. But in the past, with no caller ID, the phone rings. People think they have to answer. I also like when I'm in a business where I walk in and it's interesting to watch how people are interacting with you. And the phone rings and they can't ignore it. They make you wait and they pick up the phone and they start helping you on the phone. They're putting urgency ahead of importance. And the more you pay attention to that, the more you'll see it in yourself. So, uh, and stress drives urgency. Stress drives that intensity that leads to the urgency because we're constantly avoiding that fight or flight. We're thinking that, where's the next shoe going to drop? So these are the areas that when pressure surfaces, these patterns show up. Clarity versus chaos. This is like coherence. Chaos, we want coherence. We don't want chaos. We don't want rigidity. You're going to have small amounts of that, but we don't want so much that it's creating a fixed mindset behavior. Versus control. Pressure shows who trusts their team and who tightens the grip. So when people start approaching, they get into that zone where they're heading towards fight flight. Naturally, they start lashing out. They start closing in on being more protective. Remember the cognitive narrowing, and as the cognitive narrowing happens, awareness and their options also their awareness of options seems to decrease, and this causes them to be more protective. They start magnifying threats. Again, it makes them priorities versus reactivity. Calm leaders protect priorities. Reactive leaders chase the problem in the room. Accountability versus blame. Stress reveals whether leaders own outcome else to who's at fault. And then decision making versus good leaders decide with information. Others stall, looking for clarity that never comes. In my stability under pressure, I talk about when you see an athlete mistake that clearly he or she should not have made. They clearly know how to play the game better than what they're demonstrating. We call it what it is. We say they choked. When we see make mistakes or do something that's not productive or effective, we tend to say, well, that's just personality. And it's very interesting when you look at what people know versus what they do. In sports, it's very clear that they're choking. In business, we don't call it choking, but it is. If a person is anxious, caused the cognitive narrowing, and now they're not showing up as the best version of themselves, it's not different from choking on the field. So looking at it that way, the work is not to know more. The work is to be able to stabilize and more consistently so we're spiraling out. Empathy versus emotional spillover, that's pretty much self pressure exposes emotional intelligence. And we have the intelligence. It talks about regulation quite a bit, but regulation is a broad term. Regulation includes when I say near prevention, it's happening so early in the system that it's actually looks like prevention, but it's causing stability. This is really, really quick adjustments. Like just like the airplane, if you if you're sitting in the passenger seat, it feels like it's going straight. You look in the cockpit and you'll see adjusting the attitude and the direction because they're having to adjust. If they don't adjust that, they'll end up being worse. But because they adjust it so early, you don't feel it. If they adjusted it late, you would definitely feel it. And the idea. Dynamic suspension is a great example because dynamic suspension to react in millisecond time based on how fast the wheels are moving. It's, in other words, correlating the speed of the wheel moving up and down with how bumps are, and it's changing the suspension dampening and stiffness on the fly for maximum handling. Why you have like sport suspension and comfort suspension. That's why you can have that because it's using technology to assess what's going on and adjust real time. And that's what we do with dynamic leadership. That is why it's called dynamic because you're doing it real time at the millisecond level. You're not waiting for the conscious mind. Systems versus heroics. Stress tests the system. Leaders with processes rely on it. Others rely on force. And this is a lot of what I'm talking about now with the daily series. Leadership one to one, that's like the latter part. But there's a limit. That's why spans of control tend to be 6 to 8 as ideal. 10 starts to stretch it. But if you go back in time, it's always been around 8 people in control, military teams, etc. When you move to one team, you have to rely on systems, and those systems have people inside of them, and that's why the KPIs become more important because you're looking for early indicators. So, what actions can you take? You can order your stress patterns. Notice how you act under pressure. Build decision rules early. Systems, not willpower. Calm on small stakes and get feedback after pressure moments. Dynamic leadership is we move everything upstream. So if you look at, see if this is in here. Oh. All right, do in dynamic leadership. This is the conscious mind side. This is the network of neurons side. And over here is processing in the millisecond. This process is 50 bits per second. It's near to this. Dynamic does is it instead of waiting for communication to come across in a way that we understand it, we pay attention to the signals that come up because this is happening physiologically, right? It's energy through the neural pathways. Those neural pathways that are habits are the path of least resistance. And you can see to understand what the person is thinking or why they had this reaction, but you can tell there was a and what we want to do is not wait until the next day or the next week and about it. We want to ask, hey, what's coming up for you? I just want to and get some input from the crowd or get some feedback from the group. And it doesn't you don't have to call the person out, but if you start seeing a signal here or there, you know that something's going on. If you wait and you let those signals turn into a thought, because what happens is the subconscious converts these signals that coming from the neural pathways, these associations, it converts it into something that can be perceived by the conscious mind, which is like a thought or it could be a picture, but it's something that they have. And then the next thing, that the conscious mind will take that and turn it into meaning, which, by the way, the subconscious does hand off some meaning, which is why we're getting triggered. And if you don't, by intervening, you can correct that meaning. That's the idea. The subconscious over here, you had the cognitive biases are coming into. Let's go to the next slide. Over here, biases are coming into play. Here is the rapid appraisal, and the meaning is starting to be applied. And over here, action formation, and this is the handoff. What gets handed off to the conscious mind. And once the conscious mind sits with it for a few seconds, it turns it into a narrative. It connects it to a story. It connects it to a belief, and then it's at the point where it will defend it. And once you will defend this idea, it's now becoming part of your identity, and it's change it. So by changing it early, catching it at the middle, you have a great opportunity to adjust the trajectory. It's like this. Um, I'll be with you in a minute. I just want to pull up another. All right, so it's like this. If you look at the network of neurons side, you have the conscious mind side over here, and then you have a graph that shows effort, and you have influence. And these are the two graphs. The earlier you can take action, so this is the network of neurons, aka subconscious. And this is the conscious mind. So the earlier you take action, the less effort is required. And it's, even though it grows, it's still much less. Conscious mind side, that effort to redirect it increases because now it becomes narrative, defended, identity. Meanwhile, if you look at the influence side, oh, that's what I was looking for. If you look at the influence side, the amount of influence you have over here to move the needle or adjust trajectory, to adjust the trajectory, in other words, the impact that you're going to have on the trajectory is very, very high over here. And then it starts to drop as you get in side for the same reason. So, million bits per second processing, and this is 50 bits per second. And that's why at the millisecond level, this is about 100 milliseconds. And then this formation that happens, you call it, let's call it 3 minutes, of 3 minutes. And I'm not being scientific here, but the point is the conscious mind has a reaction time of a half second. We know that emotional modulation takes 90 seconds if you or 90 seconds the emotion passes through. So there's your 1.5 minute right there. And then after that happens, the more meaning 3 minutes. And in that time, if you if you move everything upstream, and the way you move it upstream is by conditioning it. You condition in desired behavior so that it happens automatically. This is putting the automaticity. So if I knew that you could notice when a person has telling intention, excuse me, when they're triggered to say something, you probably remember some instances like that. And if I told you when you see that to ask coming up for you or something like that, or let's stop, let's pause here and get feedback. Once you do that a few times and you see the benefit, you start to it starts to get reinforced, and that becomes a habit. You can also create that by visualizing and implementation intentions. But the point is, the same way that the habits you have today were created is how we create the habits to do these things at the automaticity level. And that's how, let's see if we have, don't have anybody coming on, but the Ask Anything link is right there. It's also in the chat. Some of you may be able to see that. What's the difference? Some questions. What's the difference between managing stress and training stability under pressure? Yeah, managing stress is all after the fact. Managing stress is actually, unless you have some skills like meditate, you're applying and coherence and and mindfulness, management is almost like suppressing it. And most people can't feel stress anyway. They can't experience stress anyway because stress is a physiological thing that's happening, and we haven't been really trained to pay attention to physiological signals. But if you consider that 95% by habit, and you consider the network of neurons is where habit resides, because the path of least resistance is the myelinated neural pathways that has enough synapses to be firing accurately and with strength. By starting to the physical sensations, you can tell when you're under stress, and it's way later that it starts to affect a person that they realize it's stress. Sometimes you catch a cold and you can relate it back to stress. So a person's walking around and they just can't together, and then a big event passes and it's over, and all of a sudden they feel and they say, "Oh, that's what I was stressed about." As you get more in tune to your system, you're going to be able to pick up on that. Why do some people stay steady while others get overwhelmed quickly? Well, I mean, it could be a lot of reasons, but I would say there are people who naturally do. There are people who have been conditioned. For example, if you talk to somebody who grew up in a home where there's an alcoholic or drug addict, they're very, very attuned to pay attention to the subtle cues because that's how they survived. And they don't let those subtle cues pass. Well, everybody has the abilities to subtle cues. We just don't use it. Malcolm Gladwell talked about it in Thin Slicing, and he said that these art experts who could tell that the painting was fake, they couldn't say what they knew was fake. They just knew. Well, that's that thin slicing that's going on because it's happening at bits per second side. It's a sensation that comes up. They just know it's just something's just not right about it. Something's off about it. And people have that, but they don't trust it. And I used to talk about learning to tracing, but I didn't have the context of what I do now. That when you recognize associations, it stands to reason you should be trusting your thin slicing. It's a big part of it. How does the brain actually prepare for pressure before we even? There's actually two parts to this answer, I think. So if I go back here, the 7-step reset. The 7-step reset, and I'd say executives really follow 7, 1, and 2. 7, 1, and 2. Because what's done in here is trained. Now, 3 is why we do 7, 1, and 2. So that 3, the people are showing up as the version of themselves. We can't control what stimulus is going to come next. It's 33,000 days. We don't know what's coming next. We can control from here to here. And if we manage this part well, and then we do 7, which is return to mindfulness and presence, and then 1 and 2 is that steady state, that coherence. So not chaos, not rigidity. And now we're for that next step 3, because you know another stimulus is coming, right? Hey, that's one every other second. And the question was, how does the brain actually prepare? Well, that's how you can prepare. But the way the brain prepares is left to its own, it's looking for the threat in everything. And it starts to escalate in this step 2. So you could be calm, and then a bad thing happens and you're on hyper alert, and another little thing happens and you jump, and another little thing happens. So it's like this. Imagine 33,000 decisions a day. Every other second there's a stimulus response cycles. Every other second there's one. And on a day, you may look like this. With some blips, there'll be some, if you look at it from a state standpoint, it might be something more like this. And it's a good day. Everything's going on. It's predictable. And you have another day very long, and this becomes a stressor. And now this spikes, and another stimulus comes. This next one could be natural, but instead of going back down, it stays level. At worst, it keeps going up. And then there's another one. And you have the same choice again. You can stay level, going up. And now you're stressed out. And now this is where the person says, yeah, I figured just that day is going. Another bad thing is happening. If I knew this was going to happen, I knew this wasn't going to be a good day to talk. And this spikes it even more. And then here's what's really interesting. Along the way, let's say that this one is a spiker, a spike stressor. What will happen is another stimulus coming at another 2 seconds. They don't wait. They they go inside their head, ruminating about all the things that can go wrong, and they throw another 2 or 3 or 4 reaction cycles inside of this. These are not stimulus response cycles. These are stimulus reaction cycles, because they're just going stimulus to reaction, stimulus to reaction. They're not even waiting for the response. Response is over here, starting at a half second. But they're doing this inside the 600 milliseconds. So how does the brain prepare? It actually does the opposite of preparing. What with rapid recovery, going along, and if you get a spike, okay, you get a spike that comes up because we return to homeostasis, and you may skip this stimulus. You may skip the next stimulus because you're returning to, you're doing a quick check-in with yourself. You're doing some body thing. And what happens, this comes back. And now you're back to where you want to be. So we prepare, we prepare. And that for that next stimulus that you know is coming. We don't want to approach it from way up here because you're already looking for the worst case scenario. You want to get back, and this is where you use breathing. You can use posture. Physiology is a big one. You can use other kinds of anchors. You can use your talk, and these are also, if you can look at your physiology, look at your self talk, look at your breathing, and you can sort of predict or identify where you are in this process. I'm going to leave it there. Again, we'll tune in next Wednesday. It looks like I can't do 7 o'clock on Wednesday. Standing meeting at 6 o'clock, and the time just changed. So the meeting is with a place where the time doesn't change, and so uh, it used to be five. It used to be 5 a.m., which gave me plenty of time for the 7 o'clock. But now it's 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. I can't get it done. Can't get it done. It's actually a 90 minute. Anyway, that's it. I'll see you. In fact, next Wednesday I'll be on the road, so I'll do this again in 2 weeks. All right, we'll see you.